All right, so Wade, if no one had ever heard of improv, and that's what we're going to be talking about, right? Improv. How would you
Yeah.
describe being involved or improv community or groups to someone who knows nothing about improv?
I would say improv is the art of thinking on your feet and uh, building off the ideas of other people without pre-planning, right? So oftentimes it's set in a comedic setting, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. But it's about accepting the ideas that are presented and running with those ideas, and just building upon the things in front of you. Which I was going to say, describing it that way feels very esoteric and probably not what most people would assume improv
Yeah.
is. But that's how I would describe it. That's how it works for me.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So almost my first thought that comes to mind when you describe it like that is it almost seems in a lot of ways like that is outside of a theatrical definition. That was my first thought. Is like you're describing this
Totally.
almost like outside of my perspective of theater first, then explaining a piece of theater within that, right? It almost like you does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I would say
Interesting.
I would say that's right, because I would probably argue that most people are improvisers without recognizing that they're improvisers.
Good point.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's a skill that we all kind of develop. It's just whether or not you develop, how deep you go to develop it, or how much you practice that development. Um, yeah, and it's one of the things that I really like about what the art is that it is where you can utilize those skill sets.
Yeah. So that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it specifically like that, so that makes a lot of sense. So in what is there something in the past? So how did you get involved in it? Was there a significant event or something that occurred in your life that kind of sparked your interest and pushed you towards it?
Yeah,
Like,
so my high school drama teacher was a professional improviser. So during the summers, he had a little improv team that he would travel around with and do shows. Um, and so we did a lot of improv when I was in high school. And honestly, I thought it was a bit of a joke. Like I thought my teacher didn't know what he was doing. I thought it was kind of a worthless skill. I wanted to do quote unquote real theater um, in high school, and really kind of looked down on the whole thing. I mean, I remember making jokes about him being a beatnik and like not really knowing what he was doing as far as professional theater goes.
what
And
can I
go
stop
ahead.
just
Yeah.
to extend on one thing before you get into that? What specifically about it made you think that it wasn't real compared to what you had been doing in theater? You know what I mean? Like why would you say it that way?
Yeah, because it's often framed as a game. There's a
Mm.
really great book that called Improvisation for the Theater, where this gosh, I'm trying to remember. Spolin is her last name. Anyway, so she wrote this book, and it was specifically designed to help people develop their theatrical skills. And so she calls them games, and it's often set as games. And many drama teachers, especially high school drama teachers that don't have a lot of experience in a professional improv setting, will use games as a way to help transition students, right? So it's like, we have 5 minutes left. What do we do? Let's throw an improv game out there. And most theater professionals don't see improv as a valuable skill set or something that they necessarily know how to train or teach. It's a very specific kind of training, and it's a very specific kind of skill set, and it often isn't utilized to its fullest capacity. Right? There's some real subtleties to it, um, and so because theater is a specific kind of thing, right? It is a
Yeah.
script that was pre-written. You memorize lines. That is what the art form is character development. Like there's all those things. That is what I was wanting, right? I was wanting a very traditional approach to theater, and improv really kind of turns out on its head by approaching it in a way um, that that allows people to drop their inhibitions and learn how to drop their inhibitions, which actually makes them more open to subtleties in their own body, to responding to other people, and that makes the performance more authentic and genuine, and it makes the experience more authentic and genuine. Um, but without understanding that, you assume that it's just a cheesy form of entertainment.
Yeah.
Um, right? Because you think about whose line is it
I was gonna
anyway.
just say that. Like
Yeah,
you picture the like that show, yeah, yeah, yeah. Which kind of put
totally.
it. I feel like they put it on like the popular map of the world.
Yeah,
In my experience, in my timeline, I guess I feel
totally,
like it. Yeah. All
totally.
right, that makes yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at the history of improv, like there's two kind of approaches. There's this Spolin approach, and then there's theater games or theater sports, which is that game approach, the whose line is it anyway approach. And
Yeah.
they're two very different approaches,
Hmm.
which led to the event that really kind of dove into this, where I was like, oh, this is a very real thing. When I got into college and was auditioning for shows, um, I got into callbacks, and so if you're unfamiliar with how an audition works, you do an initial audition, and then you kind of get shortlisted into callback to read for specific characters. Um, and it was actually in that setting that I was like, oh, my improv skills are really, really valuable, because what you can do is in a short period of time is you can start to experiment, like whether you'd read the script prior or not, you could go in and get a sense of the dialogue, and
Yeah.
just and then read off the other person a little bit of like how are they approaching this, and again you can kind of create some authentic interaction, because you're open and willing to just be like, oh, let's play with this a little bit, let's experiment
Right.
with this a little bit, I kind of know the lines, and you're able to kind of drop the rote memorization or the concern about did I get my lines right, or is it, you get a sense of
Mm.
that. So at the end of the day, the lines don't necessarily matter. It's the interaction, it's the humanity inside the interaction of the two people on stage. And it was then because I started landing parts that I was like, oh, this is a really, really valuable skill set in the direction that I want to go, that I just had no idea. And then I, was like, oh my gosh, my teacher knew what he was doing, and I just had no idea, right? Like all of those things started to
So
come about.
so you participated in this process, but up until that point in college, you still kind of thought it was a little bit of a joke and ridiculous, even
Totally.
though you were involved in it. I mean, involved enough that it clearly made you better at what you were doing. You just didn't click that it made you better
Yeah.
until that
Yeah.
moment in college.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
super interesting.
Yeah. I didn't connect the dots until the rubber hit the road, and I was like, oh,
Oh, this actually is pretty good.
yeah, this is
Which
super
is pretty
valuable, right?
crazy that it took like kind of a lapsing of time and then a moment
Yeah.
that it finally kind
Yeah.
of all
A
clicked. I
hun-
guess
a
learning is
hundred
like that
percent.
sometimes.
Totally.
It takes a repeat a few times and then something to happen that you really get it. So
Yeah.
and yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you've been involved and done a bunch of stuff after college and stuff. So like looking forward in the future, are you intending to do more improv? Plan on doing improv? Like how do you plan on incorporating it into your
Yeah.
future
So
life?
one of the things that I do love about improv is that it's less time consuming than traditional theater, and so there's a way that you can participate without having to do weeks on end of rehearsal, long,
Mm,
4 8 hour rehearsals, and you can still get
yeah,
that sense of performance and the sense of community inside of that without the time commitment. So as a person who's involved in lots of other things but still wanting to put my foot in the door or keep my foot in the door of improv, that's a really great way to do it.
mm,
um,
that makes a lot
uh,
of sense.
yeah, so I really appreciate that. The other thing another light bulb moment for me for improv as a skill set was when I was in grad school and doing a ton of writing, especially storytelling and dialogue and things like that, is that I would hit these strides while I was writing where like my improv brain would kick in, and I would stop, and I would just have these dialogues between these two people in my head, and I was able to write that out, right? But it always took me 15 or 20 minutes to get to that point of like slog writing of just like,
Yeah,
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 let's do
yeah.
this,
Almost like
and then it
getting
was
into that state of flow that you picked up from
totally,
that almost kind of vibe. Yeah,
totally. And then
cool.
after that point clicked, then it was like, oh, the improv would kick in, and I could just let the two characters dialogue in my head. So again,
Yeah,
the same skill set, just in a completely different context. And so it's when I can get into that mode with writing, it is also so. That's another future involvement, right?
yeah.
That I really, really kind of appreciate.
It honestly it seems like a really valuable just practice, almost like like a meditation or a
Sure.
daily something. Just keeping into the practice keeps you exploring and open to new concepts, and that's cool.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
makes a lot of sense, and it does make. I think it seems cool. I've never thought about the idea of it being different than theater, that you could continue involvement without the extensive time commit that it would be a traditional play or musical or whatever you'd be involved in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's cool.
for sure.
Well, that's awesome, man. Thanks, man. I appreciate you taking a minute to talk a little bit about that. And just
Yeah,
last question: your experience with Naked Belt. You've tried a what has been your experience?
yeah. The thing that's always surprising, that was surprising to me about it is that when you wear a traditional belt, which I typically wear a belt, right, like to work. I like the way that it looks. I like the way that it feels. But with the naked belt, that whole experience just kind of disappears. And so you get the benefits of wearing a belt without the experience of wearing a traditional belt, right? Like
Hmm.
the weight of it is gone. The bulkiness of it is gone. The thing that I hate the most is like bending over and having the cold belt buckle hit my belly. Like that's the worst.
Yeah.
Um, and that experience doesn't exist, right? Like it doesn't happen with the naked belt, which is um,
Nice.
yeah, which is pleasant,
I'm
right?
That's good. Ah, that's good. That's a great description. I love that. That's yeah, that's awesome, man. I appreciate you sharing that. So yeah, again, thanks. Really appreciate it. That was cool. That was
Yeah,
fun.
no
Fun 10
problem.
minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Wade. Appreciate it.
See ya.